Hello, I'm delighted to be here with Bruce Hangen, Artistic Director and Conductor of the Orchestra of Indian Hill. Bruce is also the Director of Orchestral Activities and Professor of Conducting at the Boston Conservatory at Berkeley. Maestro, thank you for your time today.
Happy to be here.
So, how did you get started?
Well, it's a pretty long story. I'm not sure you want to hear all the gory details, but actually it goes far back, much farther back in my lifetime than most people would claim to get started in their professions. In a nutshell, I got started really in the 4th grade. When my father and mother, they were both musicians. My father was a cellist, my mother was a pianist. So in the 4th grade, my mother started me on piano lessons. My father started me the next year on cello, which was his instrument. But he was also a high school orchestra conductor. And I'm sure, I don't really remember at this point, I was pretty young at the time, but I'm sure I attended performances of his. And I'm sure that's when the bug bit me.
So do you have to be a musician to be a conductor?
Oh yes, absolutely. You have to know much more about music than you might even imagine. When it comes to conducting any composition of any kind, whether it's Beethoven or Tchaikovsky or Igor Stravinsky or Mason Bates, you have to know you have to be able to analyze the piece. You have to understand the music. You have to be able to relate to professional musicians in terms of what you want and with your own interpretation of a score. Absolutely have to be a musician.
So that leads me to ask, how do you prepare? I mean, if you're going to perform on an evening, and how much preparation is going on prior to that? For you specifically?
Yeah, there's a lot of preparation, quite frankly. I organize my programs and start studying for each one roughly a year and a half ahead of time of the first rehearsal of the piece. So, you know, if it's November, it's a year and a half before that November that I'm starting to get my scores out and taking a look at them. Some scores I may already know pretty intimately because I've conducted them before, but even now at this advanced age of mine, I'm still finding and conducting pieces that are brand new to me, especially contemporary repertoire that might be only a few years in existence. So that's when it starts. And then 95%, I would say a good 95% of my time is spent at my desk studying the music. It's only that 5%, or actually even less than 5%. It's 5% when I'm on the podium. It's less than 5% that you in the audience get to see me actually conduct.
So when you're doing that studying and you're interpreting, are you trying to interpret it as it was written, or are you making it your own?
Yes and yes. So like any composition or like any artist, let's say it's a violinist or a pianist, and let's use Beethoven because everybody knows that name. So if I'm looking at Beethoven's score of any kind, let's say it's the 5th Symphony, we all know how that goes, ba 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 ba, yeah? But there are many different ways you can do that. Da 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 da, or da 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 da, or da 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 da, or da da da. All different kinds of ways. Beethoven wrote da 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 da. So what do we do with that? Any performer is going to take a look at the music that's actually in the print, on the paper, and try to discern what it was that Beethoven wanted to say with that. And then what are we going to do with it? How are we going to make it our own? How are we going to really incorporate that into our own psyche so that we bring it off as a presentation on our own? Everybody's doing that. So it's not quite like, let's say, a pop artist doing a cover of some other artist's song, because the expectation is that you really make it your own, quote unquote. But with me, with classical music, that's an art form that has been around, in the case of Beethoven, a couple of hundred years, then we have to really take a serious look at it and try to figure out by going into the music, going into the history, going into the social context of the piece, what it was that Beethoven was really trying to say. And that's what the studying is all about.
So let's fast forward. You came from a year ago getting ready to say, okay, I think I've interpreted it the way I want to.
Right.
Then you bring it to the orchestra.
Right.
And you start practicing. So from practice to actual, production and performing in front of an audience, what's the timing on that?
Well, it's interesting. The psychology of that is that I am always gearing up when I'm studying, especially towards the last several weeks or days before a first rehearsal. I'm trying to anticipate how's this particular orchestra that I'm about to meet up with going to sound on this piece, and what's the disconnect? What's their sound going to be like compared to what I have in my head after having studied it all these weeks? What am I going to do to be ready to say, no, I'd really like to have you do it this way or do it that way, kind of thing? Because I should say, again, continuing the Beethoven Fifth example, everybody playing in an orchestra has played Beethoven's Fifth somewhere, sometime, and probably far too many times. In fact, sort of the standard reaction from professional orchestra musicians is if I program the Beethoven Fifth Symphony, they say, oh no, not that piece again. Even though we all recognize that it's a great work of art, and we truly do love the piece. But so often it gets so hackneyed in terms of its presentation that it becomes something less than special. So I am thinking about what the difference is going to be, and I need to understand that all these players have done it with other conductors and other orchestras so many other times.
Do you take feedback from the musicians?
Yes, but basically, actually, the principle is when you're in an orchestra that a conductor is really the greater among equals, and at least that's the way it is today. It used to be back in the, let's say, only 50, 60 years ago. It used to be in the era of Toscanini and Fritz Reiner and George Solti, people like that. There were tyrants, and they would get on the podium, and the stories about Toscanini are legion, about how he would stomp and yell at his players and all that sort of stuff, which, of course, you just can't do these days, and you wouldn't even really want to anymore. But actually, it's that kind of behavior that created musicians' unions. And these days, if a conductor, some young whippersnapper gets on a podium somewhere in front of an orchestra and tries to display some attitude, it's more likely that he'll get visited by the union steward during the break or after the rehearsal than would have been the case earlier, where musicians just accept it and run off in fear that they don't get fired because the conductor is showing attitude.
So you've gotten through it all. You've done several rehearsals, I'm assuming. At that point, you like it. You're bringing it into, ready to perform in front of an audience. You get to that point. Are you nervous?
I'm always nervous until I get on the podium, and then it's all channeled. Backstage, I am doing whatever I can to relax, to focus, keep my mind clear, and just go out there and be myself on the podium. And like I say, even back when I was a student, I would get nervous, but I would purposely work on focusing myself as I was walking out on the stage to get to the podium. Because that's actually the most fearful part, is, oh my gosh, people are looking at me, and I'm walking out all by myself, and the orchestra, oftentimes the orchestra turns around and who's that coming out, kind of thing. And so I get up there, but then I know it's my job. It's my responsibility to model what it is that I want from them.
So this gets to an interesting point in the conversation in terms of leadership. Yeah. I hear it. So what do you believe is the leadership attributes that are come from this skill? It's a profession. it's a skill, it's obviously artistic, but there's very definite leadership qualities. What can you pass on to my audience as we, convey this?
Well, in terms of leadership, which I actually have a short paragraph in my book, quite frankly, I can't remember what I said in it, but just off the cuff now in answering your question, first thing that comes to mind is respect. There's a lot of mutual respect going on in our stage with the Orchestra of Indian Hill and myself. I respect what they do. I like to hear when we're in rehearsal and preparing a piece, I like to hear what their ideas are. And we don't talk about it. I don't say, oh, what would you think, Mr. Smith, kind of thing. What would you think about this phrase? Even though I should say, just as a tangent here, that I used to think that if we're really going to be relevant in our 21st century, maybe what I should do, and if I really want to empower the musicians, rather than being this authoritative figure who's issuing commands, maybe I should have an opportunity where, let's say in the Baton Fifth Symphony, I ask the second violins to get together and they decide what our approach is going to be to the piece. Because I can do anything, and maybe they would like to do it a certain way. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to do that. We are basically, we run by union rules. The standard for orchestras around the world, at least in this country, is 4 rehearsals in the 2 days before a concert.
Wow, so
Yeah,
it's very...
two, even more specific than that. Each rehearsal is 2.5 hours, starts on the dot at the call time. I mean, literally in the dot, we expect musicians to be in their chairs 5 minutes ahead of time, being warmed up, walk out on stage, downbeat on the dot when the second hand gets to the 12. 2.5 hours later, exactly the same thing. When the second hand gets to stop, even if there's just one more chord to play in the piece, you have to stop.
So I didn't realize that it was that precise.
Very much.
So Bruce referenced his book, Conducting Music Today. I just wanted to make sure that a lot of the questions that I'm asking are from this book, and it's very deep, it's very interesting, and I wanted to get a little bit more technical about something very specific that I picked up on the book, and that was the baton.
Oh, sure.
Can you tell us about the baton?
I just happen to have one here. This is one of many batons that I have. It's very light. I think this one even has a balance point. Well, its balance point is right there. And the theory behind that is that if I'm holding the stick like this, I theoretically don't have any extra weight hanging out past my hand. And what the baton represents is an extension of my arm. The theory is that orchestras are so large, when you have 75 to 100 musicians on the stage, that to be conducting like this, even though there are some who get away with it, to be conducting like this is less specific and less of a guidance and harder for the orchestra to see precise beats than it is to see that.
So it really, to me, there's a lot of rehearsal, there's a lot of preparation, and you're saying that they're actually picking up on nuances with the baton.
Yes, very much so. And the nuances really are in regards to timing more than anything else. Because you can do, let's see, dee da dee da dee da dee da dee da dee, and I can time that however I want to. We, generally speaking, we work out the framework for that in rehearsal, so that at concert there's really nothing that's that spontaneous, but it's the infinitesimal dynamics of timing, just like a comedy routine. You're reading your audience, and you're sensing that timing just immediately, and hopefully correctly also, so that it has an effect.
So you're conducting. What's the, other than the baton, is there other dynamics that are coming into play as a score is being delivered?
Exactly. Well, remember that what my job is I'm basically giving the time to an orchestra. That's why we're beating time with a stick. And music, as you know, is written in different meters. You can have 4 beats to the bar, you can have 3 beats to the bar, you can have 2 beats to the bar, that kind of thing. Like, for instance, the Sousa March. Stars and Stripes Forever. It's just in 2 beats. So I'm going down, up. I'm just giving 2 beats to the bar. If it's a waltz, Blue Danube Waltz, dee dee da da dee, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. If I'm doing a Tchaikovsky symphony that's in 4 beats to the bar, da dee da da da, etc. I'm doing 4 beats to the bar. So the quality of my beating will generate some kind of musical response from them. They're all playing the notes. We've all rehearsed it. It's all coming together. I'm not trying to keep everybody together because with this orchestra, they're professional orchestras. They could play it without me, but don't tell anybody. I said that. So all they really need is a downbeat, and I'll let them go. But then it's all about the quality. I can be forceful with the stick, or I can be really elegant and much more lyrical.
So a beat is almost, in this, is almost like a scientific approach. You know, you're...
Yeah, very much so. And I'm tossing out leadership cues to everybody to say, okay. And the cue might be, remember, this is what we rehearsed the other day, or here, take this and go with it, kind of thing, spontaneous even in the performance.
Because, as you said, the preparation, how much time you have with them, you've got to make the most of that time that you have with them, and then to bring them onto the stage. So.
Right. So the ultimate goal is that I tell my conducting students that I have also is the ultimate goal is we start a rehearsal, they're trying to figure out what we're supposed to be doing when they're playing the piece for the first time with us, trying to be figuring out, okay, what's the disconnect, or what's the delta, the term we use now, what's the delta between what they're doing and what I want them to do, because it's my responsibility, and they look to me for that kind of leadership. They know that they can play all the notes. I'm not there to teach them the notes. We're there to put the notes together in some meaningful kind of way, and so I will lead them, give them that kind of leadership, and then the ultimate goal is over the course of rehearsals, they should be able to play it on their own in performance. That would be the ultimate, is if I didn't have to show up for the concert. Believe it or not. Of course, it doesn't happen, but because there are the times when they still need a stick to give them a certain amount of timing or a cue for this or that.
So, I think you've answered this, but how do you bring out the best in the musicians? How do you, so they're practiced, they're professionals, you've rehearsed, you're there, but how do you bring the best out of them?
It's sort of like asking, tell me about behavioral psychology. I'm not sure I have the answer for that. But I do know that my responsibility on the podium to bring out the best in the musicians is to have my own job, my responsibility covered as well as I possibly can. My standards for my learning my own scores the standards are very high because I have to know that I have to come up to that level so that I can bring them up to that level. If I don't prepare a score ahead of time and I'm down at this kind of a level, then they're already there. Then what are we going to do during rehearsal? And if a conductor just makes up ideas during rehearsals, there's no respect there because musicians can see through that immediately.
Gotcha. So, how do you connect with the audience?
Smile.
That's it?
Well, what else am I going to do? If you're in a standard symphony situation, your orchestra at the beginning of a concert is already on the stage. The concertmaster has stood up and asked for an A, so the orchestra's all tuned, and they're quiet. Time for the conductor to arrive, okay? Backstage they say, okay, Maestro, it's your turn. I walk out, there's applause, polite or enthusiastic or whatever, or inquisitive or whatever. And that's the moment that I feel I had a conducting teacher once way back in conservatory who said, when I walk out on stage, when I set my first foot on the stage and the audience can see me, I turn and I look at them. And I have at least a warm smile. It's not a big sheepish grin or anything like that. But it's just a welcoming way to accept the fact that they're in the room. We're here to perform for them. And I try to show that attitude in all my actions. And so I get on the podium, smile, I bow, I say thank you, turn around, and I don't see the audience until the end of the concert. So it's kind of difficult to really connect. What we do at Orchestra of Indian Hill is I have pre-concert talks and post-concert talks, and that way I can relate to them even more personally with them. There was a time I was doing a whole bunch of concerts with the Boston Pops, and I really enjoyed picking up the microphone in between pieces and talking to them. I just felt like I was speaking with family or friends or whatever, and I was told that audiences just love that.
So is the symphony evolving? Has it changed from when you first started to now? And if it has, how?
Yeah, it has changed. One thing that's interesting is that while the art form itself, especially the grand old pieces that we love to perform, Beethoven, Brahms, Tchaikovsky, Stravinsky, whatever, it goes on and on, that hasn't changed. The art form is still that. Our challenge with symphony orchestras today is to find a way to be relevant to audiences that don't identify with Brahms and Beethoven and Mozart so much any longer. Remember back in the day, and I mean by that maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago, before television, before the internet, before computers, orchestras were entertainment. And that's what people did as part of their entertainment. I'm even talking back in the early days of movie theaters when movies weren't the in thing to do. We have transitioned sociologically here. We've transitioned to the point where orchestras are not that relevant to most people in our society. And we're becoming ever more marginalized. And we in the business, especially because we're so incredibly dedicated to wanting to maintain this art form and perform it because we know that it can have everlasting effects on your life just by listening to it. We want to do whatever we can to make it relevant. That's where it's changed. Where these days it's how we present the symphony music that has been this way ever since the 1700s.
Finding symphony music show up, it's always been there, but you'll hear pieces and original scores in movies, and they quite frankly, I think they make the movie, and some of the more dramatic pieces that have come out of some movies, even in Star Wars.
Right, exactly. Well, John Williams is the obvious, very successful case in point here, and his music is very symphonic. As a matter of fact, I've had some recent conversations with just folks in the business as well as outside of the business, saying that, okay, so we're playing Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven and all these people. Why not include John Williams? Because his music is just as valid, and it's even more familiar to audiences who come to listen to orchestra concerts. The fight that we have in considering John Williams or arrangements of Elton John's music or whatever it happens to be is there are the conservatives, both in the business and outside, who say, oh, that's not symphonic. So what we have to do is rise above that and show that there is a way to mix and match all kinds of wonderful repertoire so that one is involved, if you're in the audience, with a truly great musical performance, whatever it happens to be in terms of content.
So, digital, I'm in the industry. We know that we're living in the connected world, but has digital and the digital transformation affected your profession?
It's affecting the symphony orchestra business in the sense that there are living composers who are incorporating digital elements into their music that they're writing for orchestra. But you look at any standard orchestra, you have these violins and violas and cellos and basses, and that were all, many of them made in the 1600s, 1700s. You have, again, Mozart, Beethoven, that music has not changed. You might remember, you're probably too young, but some time ago there was a very popular recording called Hooked on Classics, which was classical music to a beat, which was I think fortunately short-lived. But at the same time, that music, we don't want to do anything to that music. But I'm thinking of a contemporary composer whose music I've done fairly recently, whose name is Mason Bates. And he has devised basically a soundtrack to go with symphony orchestra. This is all his original composition. And he's in the orchestra with a laptop, typing a key to keep the beat the same as the orchestra beat, because, you know, it's also flexible. It's not like a rock song where you get started and the beat doesn't change. But he's there, and you hear his music come out of the speakers, which works against and with the sound of the orchestra itself. And I really love that kind of amalgam of a musical product. It's a great hybrid. And I think that's where I think that's where the digital element is really going to come to play.
So it hasn't really sped up any of the development process that, you know, goes into your preparation, you know, starting a year before, and even in this, you know, you still have to put the work in.
You still have to put the work in, right. I guess the only thing that's sped up is I now don't have to go to the public library to do my research on all these pieces. You know, I can save my time instead of driving or walking or taking the train. I can open up my laptop and research program notes from all over the world, quite frankly, about pieces, and I can discover the historical context of these pieces that I would have been restricted from doing even in a public library if the book that I was looking for was not in that library. So that's what's really amazing. And I will add that now orchestras are not doing it yet because it's a fairly complicated process. But a lot of chamber music musicians and soloists are now playing from their iPads, where the music is there and it's digital. And there are programs and apps now where you can have a digital piece of music on you, and you can actually make notations like you would on an actual piece of music too. So that's existent. There's a pedal mechanism, so you don't have to worry about flipping pages or flipping too many pages. Oh my God, that would be the worst thing, to flip too many pages. But there are pedal mechanisms which will turn a page at a time. I see that coming for some conductors and for some orchestras, if we can just be sure that the glitches of the world are not going to show up when you last want them to.
Maestro, in closing, what are you looking forward to in the future?
Well, the big ticket item for me is I'm looking forward to this new music hall that's being built for us. We hopefully will be moving into it in the fall of 2022, and I cannot wait. Why? Because this orchestra of mine, the Orchestra of Indian Hill, has been limited to a high school auditorium, which we don't get to have any old time we want it. We have to work it out with the school schedule. A high school auditorium just does not have the same ambiance as a professional concert hall. And once we're in our own space, our own concert hall, our own building, we're able to devise all kinds of projects on our own schedule as we would like to do, and to have much more in the way of social spaces. So that's what comes back to your original question about how do you relate to an audience. This is how we as an institution will relate to our audience and get them to be part of us.
Well, I look forward to that.
So do I.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Tracy.